Look, I know eclipse season is here, but at least this week we get a small little break after the storm that we just had. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White, if you don't know me already. This time we were talking about March 25th through March 31st of 2024. We have not a lot to talk about, but also a lot to talk about. So I'm just going to get started. Oh, by the way, this is the last week where I'm running my $50 off discount. After this week, it's over, so that's going to be April 1st. That is over. Make sure you grab it now. You'll be locked in at the price that I have at this moment. My prices will be going up after this, and what I did last time I raised my prices is I locked in all of my OG clients at the price that they paid. I'm going to be doing that again, so if you want to get locked in at that price, this is the time to book. So technically, starting on Monday, we have the lunar eclipse in Libra. It really happened Sunday night, but it's also happening really early Monday morning, like 1 a.m. kind of a thing. And so as we go into Monday, we still have this eclipse energy happening. How it's going to look is kind of dependent on your own situation, whether it's like more on Sunday or more on Monday. I think because you're going back to work and everyone's kind of going into the regular thing on Monday, you'll probably see it a lot more on Monday. So I really want to know in the comments what is going on for you with this eclipse season, because as I talk to the people around me, it's like this thing's happening and this thing's happening. And I don't know, I just find it really, really interesting how this eclipses really do cut things off or start major things, kind of with or without your consent. So let me know in the comments what you're going through. But we have this lunar eclipse in Libra. And what's the most important thing is that this is coming back around to what happened around October 12th and 13th of last year. That was our solar eclipse in Libra, and that was our first set of eclipses in Libra. And this lunar eclipse is bringing all of that stuff back up again. The solar eclipse kind of plants a seed, and this lunar eclipse really brings it to light, right? It's kind of like time to reap what you sow, essentially. And so when you have an eclipse, it is like an extreme anxious feeling, and we're going to have that all week. I'm actually going to talk a lot about how we navigate that feeling. But as we go with this lunar eclipse in Libra, it's on the south node. This is something draining. This is something exhausting. This is something that you don't want to deal with, but it's kind of coming up and you have to address it. The south node can also bring up things from the past. So I think that's really important. Especially if you're 19, 20, 21, it's going to be hard to kind of go back in your past that way. But if you're in your 30s or 40s, really think about things that you've done in your past, especially what house Libra rules in your chart. And again, what were some of the things that you were doing, or how did that area of your life look like before? And is any of that coming back up during this time? So the only thing we have going on Monday is this lunar eclipse, and then the moon conjoins the south node later on throughout the day. So this is just one of those days that is all right, lunar eclipse time. You are going to be presented with situations that may or may not be in your control. What I've tried to tell people is you don't have to react to an eclipse, but I want to throw a caveat on that. With eclipses, sometimes you are forced to make a decision. I on my Patreon live stream I did last night, I kind of went into this a little bit. I personally did one of the craziest things in my life during an eclipse, and it worked out for me. It was extreme. This was March, April of 2016. At the time, I took my first personal development course. It changed my life. Me and my girlfriend at the time immediately broke up. I quit both of my jobs, didn't know what to do. And my sister gave me a call and she's like, hey, we have a basement for rent in Denver if you want to move up here. And I was like, fuck it. And that's kind of how I got started on my track. I mean, if I didn't make that decision, I don't know if I'd be an astrologer. I don't know if I would actually have the opportunity to do music like I'm doing right now. And so, I'm really thankful for that time. And it's just one of those things, though, where you can make a decision on an eclipse. Just know it's not light. It's not oh, I'm just going to do this and, be a little silly goose. It is going to have very profound impacts as you go out, go on through the rest of your life. But for, I think, a lot of people, you might be presented with a situation or information that feels like you have to react, that feels like you have to do something. And I would just really sit with it and ask, do you have to do that? Do you have to react, or can you respond? And if you're in a situation where you have time, my advice is wait till that third week of April, maybe that fourth week of April, when everything kind of chills out a little bit more and we have a little bit more of a clear head to make these decisions. And so as we go throughout Monday, we have this eclipse, something's going to pop off. And again, this is the thing with astrology. Give this a couple days. Give this a couple days. The last eclipse that we had in Libra, it's so funny. I had one of the best, I don't want to say one of the best days ever, but it was a really, really good day. But then later on, 2 days later, I found out something that happened in between that period that really just caused a lot of chaos in my life. And so you want to give it a couple days to like, all right, see what ends up happening, because something could be happening behind the scenes and it may not be revealed to you for a minute. And again, as we go on throughout Monday, the moon will conjoin the south node. So there's this kind of like, okay, I have to address this. I have to handle this. What is this? It's going to be draining. It's going to be exhausting. It's in Libra. It might have to do with relationships. It might have to do with balance. It might have to do with law and order. But Monday is just kind of eclipse day. So you kind of just need to sit back and let things happen, if that makes sense. And so we get to Tuesday, and this is where I wanted to talk about, like, not a lot's happening this week, but I want to bring up two things. Number one, with Mars in Pisces now, Mars is with Saturn. They are co-present together. So we have both of the quote unquote malefic planets in the same area of our charts. You're not going to see this really come out and alive until they conjoin, and that happens in 2 weeks from now. But the sense of something building up, the feeling that something is going to happen is there. And I think that's really important to understand and know. Now, the other thing is Mercury, even though it's not retrograde yet, and it will go retrograde next week, is deep in shadow. It is moving very slow at this point, and we're in between eclipses. And in between eclipses is like this really weird 2-week energy where it's like, it just feels like a portal. And I don't really like using that kind of terminology because I think it's kind of like vague. But with eclipses, it's just a very weird time where it's like, well, this could happen and this can happen, and everything's just slightly weird under eclipse. And I think what's important to know is, like, as we kind of go through this week, that energy is lingering of, okay, we're in eclipse season now. Everything's kind of weird and different, and we're building up for Mars, Saturn, and we have Mercury about to retrograde. So even though not a lot is happening this week, that feeling, that buildup is happening. And what I want to bring out is the little things that we're having this week. What I think are important to do is, like, okay, we know X, Y, and Z is about to happen. What can we get done, and what can we do what that is within our means this week, since there's not that much going on? And so as we get into Tuesday, the moon, while it's in Libra, is going to make an opposition to Mercury in Aries. So again, Mercury is in shadow at this point. Mercury in Aries likes to be combative, likes to fight, likes to be, again, say like things very aggressively. And I think that moon in Libra making an opposition is like, hey, I made this analogy with someone the other day. You can't change people's minds by yelling at them. You have to go on their side. You have to create a relationship for them to see your point of view. Like, when you're just combative with everything that you say, and again, like, I know it's funny, this is coming from me because I'm a human being. I'm learning my lessons every single day. But the analogy I was thinking of was like, I was talking to someone about, like, politics and, social issues, and how, like, everyone's in disagreement and they want to divide us and stuff like that. And I used the analogy of, like, there is this story of this black guy that, like, infiltrated the KKK, and he, like, tried to befriend them and, like, was cool with them rather than being like, you guys are racist and you're trying to kill me, blah, blah, blah. Like, he went in there, befriended them, and a lot of these KKK members ended up leaving the KKK and befriending this black guy. And I love that story for, like, if you really want to have someone see your side of things or give you sympathy and empathy, like, you have to treat them like a friend. You have to give them that, that you have to give what you're going to get what you give. And I think it's important to ensure that you're going to give exactly what you want to get. And so I look at this moon Mercury opposition as like, okay, it's going to be easy to be combative. It's going to be easy to just, yipe and yell. With the moon going opposite here is like, okay, how do we bring this into balance? How do we say what we need to say, but also being sensitive to other people's emotions, being sensitive to how someone else is going to feel about it? Like, Libra is that balance between, you and someone else, and the balance between, two things in general. So I think Tuesday is just really important of like, okay, this is really on my mind. I might be really angry, or I might be really charged up on this, whether it's a plan, whether it's a, person, whether it's a subject, whether it's whatever it is. The moon in Libra is just asking you, like, hey, how do we just bring some balance to this? How do we make it a little bit, more fair? Maybe another good example is, like, rather than going 150 miles on the freeway, like, and you can crash, why not we just go like 20 miles an hour above the speed limit? Not a felony. Like, it's a felony over 25 miles an hour. Don't ask me how I know that. But anyway, the moon opposite Mercury, like, try to just bring some rationality and some sense and some balance into whatever conversations that you're having. So then we get to Wednesday, and this is when the moon is going to ingress into Scorpio. It's then going to square Pluto and then make a trine to Mars. So I think when this is kind of the day that all of that eclipse energy kind of hits us, the moon is related to our bodies and how we feel, and it's in detriment in Scorpio. It's gunky, it's yucky. And there's something about the moon in Scorpio that is just kind of like, depressing. And I don't really like using that word, but what it's good for is examining those emotions, right? Like, it's not good to suppress like negative emotions, but we have to find ways to work through them, not necessarily avoid them or get stuck in them. And so as the moon goes into Scorpio, I think we're going to be feeling more lethargic, not feeling that high energy. We're also now in a waning moon after an eclipse. So it's kind of like, you gave it all, you put it out all on the field. And now you're like, if you've ever had a really busy day where you put your all into everything and you just come home and crash, that's kind of how the moon in Scorpio kind of feels, except you don't just get to sleep. It's like, oh, that was a lot. And I had to deal with all of that. And that was really hard. And the moon makes a square to Pluto. And, Pluto, I'm having SJ on. I'm actually talking to him tonight when I record this, which is Thursday. And I'm going to talk to him a little bit about like my newer feelings around Pluto and Aquarius. Maybe I'll make a new delineation episode about it, more around like the whole idea of Pluto and Aquarius. But Pluto being about like fear and, power and, something I like talking about with Pluto is like, it makes the small things big and the big things small. And when you have like the moon in Scorpio, we're attaching to things like really intensely. And as the moon squares Pluto, it's like, why are we attaching to the situation so immensely? Like, how can we work through this? I think on Wednesday, that feeling of attachment and making these small things really, really larger than life, that might, again, cause us to spiral, go a little bit out of control. That's really present. But then the moon immediately starts making a trine to Mars and Pisces. I am kind of a fan of Mars and Pisces. It's not my favorite, but it's one of those things where it's like Mars and Pisces is really interesting. Mars and Pisces is kind of weird, but in an interesting way. And I look at the moon making a trine to Mars where it's like, you don't have to make a decision right now. Like Mars and Pisces, I always felt as if Mars is like action and drive and energy, and Pisces is kind of like intuition and spirit, and it's kind of foggy, and Neptune's there, so it's kind of mystifying. It's like, let's just take one step at a time. Like rather than, for example, when you're driving on the freeway or if you're driving on a very foggy road, like you're not going to see, 300-400 feet in front of you. You're only really going to see that first 15-20 feet. And you kind of just have to go at your own pace. You kind of just have to like, all right, like let me pay attention to the lines and go with it. Maybe turn on your fog lights a little bit. And so I look at the moon trining Mars as like, maybe I just need to take one step at a time. Maybe I need to work through this emotion and through the situation one step at a time and not make up these, stories of how it's going to look in the future or what if, and, living in fear. And, I know I've been talking a lot about like my path with, Christianity and Jesus and stuff like that. And I know it triggers some people, but like the thing that there's a saying that I've really resonated with lately is like, I take care of all of the small things so God can take care of all the big things. I think I heard that from RFK. And so, I know that triggers some people, and I think that's fine. Like, I'm just being honest with like my path. I'm not here to like, get like baptize you or anything like that. But there's so much power in that where it's like, you know what? Let me just do what I'm in control of. And let me not worry about what's not really in my control. And what are the things, the small steps that I can do? And on Wednesday, when the moon's in Scorpio trining Mars, this is all water stuff. It is very emotional. It's not really going to be like, oh, let me just, be very practical and, very focused on what I'm doing and I'll not worry about it. It's like we have to kind of work through those emotions. It reminds me of like yoga, maybe. Like I suck at yoga. I'm not flexible, but from what people tell me, it's like when you move your body, it's this emotional experience and you purge things out and you kind of just focus on your breath and you just focus on the movement right then and there. So that's how I really look at Wednesday. Then we get to Thursday. We're going to have the moon making a trine to Saturn. It's going to then go opposite Jupiter. It's then going to go opposite Uranus, and then it's going to trine Venus. And the highlight that we have for Thursday, this is really the only highlight for the week besides the eclipse, is Venus makes a sextile to Uranus. So Thursday is kind of a mixed bag. I think as the moon's in Scorpio making a trine to Saturn, after we're kind of working through this and knowing what steps to kind of take, listening to our intuition, listening to our gut of like, and again, not our fear. Another thing with the whole Christian stuff is like, fear is the devil. Like, and it's so fucking true. And I think that's the most, in my opinion, I think the most powerful thing you can do is like, anytime you have something coming from fear, that's literally like the devil. And I know that sounds very like Louisiana Bible Belt type of shit, but when you live in fear, you let all of the negative emotions like come over you. And I think that's where, again, if you want to use the analogy of like, oh, that's where the devil wants to get you. You don't have to use that, framework, but I look at it as like, let's like, fear is bad. We don't have to live in that fear. So let's get out of that. As the moon makes that trine to Saturn and we work through that, there's this level of emotional and internal discipline. I think as the moon's trining Saturn, there's this, okay, like I can grow up here. I know how to handle my inward beliefs. Like we can have all these extroverted Sagittarius, like, sure, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. Everything's going to be great. But Saturn in Pisces is like, do you actually feel that? Do you actually, embody that on the inside? Like, are you really aligning like your spirit, your mind, body, and spirit? And so I look at the moon in Scorpio trining Saturn is like, okay, I've worked through that. And this is like another notch in the discipline track of like, cool, I can do this. I am growing up in this way. I am feeling more mature in this area. But then the moon goes opposite Jupiter and Uranus. So with the moon in Scorpio opposite Jupiter in Taurus, there is this kind of like fear of losing value. The moon in Scorpio wants to clutch, it wants to hold on, and it's opposite Jupiter in Taurus, where Jupiter in Taurus is very like, again, like I want to expand my wealth. I want to expand, what I own, and I want to expand value. And I'm really heavy in those beliefs there. And something I've been thinking a lot about lately is like, if you love it, let it go. I've been really thinking about that. And I'm not really sure why. The other thing I look at too is, I was just talking about this with a client the other day, and this is also going to trigger some people, but like, we have all these programs around money and around wealth, and I understand. Like, I used to be very, broke and selling plasma fucking every day of the week if I could to just get by. And I just want you to take what I'm saying here and apply it to your own situation. But like, stuff is just stuff. Money is just money. Everything comes and goes and everything's temporary. Like, we can't get attached to these physical things. And it's like, yeah, money can buy you a lot of things that are like very happy and stuff like that. But I look at this moon opposite Jupiter, and I'm using that analogy because this moon opposite Jupiter is very like, there's this resistance to like, again, there's this resistance to losing security or losing wealth and, losing what we have. And I look at the moon in Scorpio opposite Jupiter and Taurus is kind of like, the more that we hold on to things, the more that they own us. And I think this is going to be an important, I don't want to say wake up call, but more of a reflection on like, do you own things or do they own you? And can you detach from certain situations to be like, you know what? Like, because for me in my life, I'm at the point where like, if I lost everything, which by the way would suck, I would not like that. I'd figure it out. I think I'd be cool with it. I would get over it. It's rather than holding on to that negative experience and being like, having a victim story about it, which would be really easy to do. It would just be more of like, okay, like this is the situation I'm in and how am I going to build up better? I'm going to let go of my attachment to all of this stuff and, keep doing what I know is going to work for me. And so that moon goes opposite Jupiter, where there's this really in-depth look of like, okay, what do I want and what am I holding on to? And why do I have this fear of losing things and, losing that security and that stability? You know what I've been thinking a lot about lately is the Scorpio-Taurus axis reminds me of buried treasure. I've been thinking a lot about that because I think it's interesting. It's like, I want to preserve my wealth like back in pirate days, so I'm going to hide it underground. So Scorpio. But sometimes you can like hide it underground and then you'll never fucking find it. And then no one will and no one gets it. And so it's one of those things where it's kind of like, how much are we really holding on to our wealth or, how much are we attaching to stuff to where like it kind of self-sabotages us in a way. And then the moon goes opposite Uranus, where there is some sort of, again, disruptive breakthrough. Again, like for example, let's say you're going to go bury treasure because you're afraid someone's going to find it. And then you didn't call before you dig. What is it? 811 or something like that, 311. And then you hit a gas pipe and then you blow up. I always find those videos really funny. But the moon going opposite Uranus is like, careful where you go down in your rabbit holes. Like when we do feel that emotional insecurity and we do feel that fear, we can spiral down into these rabbit holes. And sometimes we can touch buttons we don't really want to touch. We can hit that funny bone and it kind of hurts. And so I would really, with the moon opposite Uranus, there's going to be some sort of disruption. A really good example of the moon opposite Uranus was I was at the local astrology meetup here in Denver like 2 years ago. And during the meeting, there was the moon was going to hit the south node and go opposite Uranus. I was like, what is going to be the disruption this time? Like I was just waiting for it. And so we're all talking. It's really quiet. And all of a sudden you just hear someone outside screaming bloody murder, just going crazy. I mean, he doesn't stop for like 30 minutes. Finally, someone in the restaurant comes out there and tries to address it and ambulances roll up. Turns out some homeless guy tried to like creep up on a girl and she just blasted him with fucking hot sauce, like with pepper spray. And which I love, which is so moon and Scorpio, right? Like, let me blind you with spicy juice, which is moon and Scorpio opposite Uranus. And it just disrupted this whole other event that was going on. That's such a good example of the moon going opposite Uranus. But then after that, and this is the good news, the moon will go opposite Uranus. There's that disruption, but it's going to make this trine to Venus. Everything works out. Like, okay, there is this disruption, but the moon trining Venus is like, all right, Venus is fun, pleasure, connection. She's exalted. And the moon's in Scorpio, where I look at the moon in Scorpio trining Venus in Pisces, where it's like, you're depressed, you're sad, and your friends invite you out. And you're like, I don't know if I want to go. And they convince you, and you go out with your friends, and you actually end up having a really good time. And you're not actually thinking about the things that are wrong in your life or what happened. And like, you're able to just be present in the moment and have fun. And that's the other thing on Thursday is, like I said, the other highlight is Venus is going to make a sextile to Uranus. There's some sort of like, what I love about sextiles is it's very casual. It's very like, not like all of a sudden this major awesome thing happens to work out for you. It's very like, oh, you want to take this little opportunity real quick? Come over here. And it's some sort of nice surprise. So Venus making a sextile Uranus, especially while Venus is exalted and, in Pisces, she's very loosey-goosey, having fun, connecting, flirting, enjoying things, being very rose-colored glasses. And sextiling Uranus is, again, like trying something kind of new. Like you go to a new bar or a new club downtown, and it's really fun, and you kind of see people there, and there's something, again, it's not like we're planning to go to this major event and it's going to be so great. It's like, oh, let's just try this place real quick. Let me just do this real quick and see what happens. So I think on Thursday, there's kind of a lot of back and forth, but then by the evening, as the moon makes that trine to Venus and Venus sextiles Uranus, there is some sort of like spurt of fun energy that is very casual, but like kind of ends the day in a nice way. Then we get to Friday, and the moon will be in Scorpio, trining Neptune. As well, the moon will make ingress into Sagittarius, a sextile Pluto, and then the moon will make a square to Mars. Biggest thing with the moon in Scorpio, trining Neptune, while the moon's still in Scorpio, and we're still a little bit sensitive and still a little bit like, depressed in some way, as it trines Neptune, try not to make stories. It's super easy to extrapolate on evidence that you have or a way that you feel and turn this whole story around where it's like, of course this thing happened because I'm not worthy of love or success. And, I was never loved, and, my dad left me, and, my mom beat me, or something along those lines. Try not to like spiral and make a whole story about your bad situation. What I do think the moon in Scorpio trining Neptune is good for is being creative with our outlook on this. Like, okay, we feel really bad. We don't have to lean into the bad energy, but how can we, again, like distort the way that we see things to create a positive outcome around it? The moon then goes into Sag, and I love the switch from the moon in Scorpio into Sag, because moon going into Sag is like freedom, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to start feeling better. I'm going to do this way. It's like we get out of the Scorpio den and we feel free. We feel excited. We're like, all right, like what's next? Like I'm out of my little, sad corner, my little victim, corner here now. The moon will go into Sagittarius and it sextiles Pluto. I like that because there is that empowered feeling. It's kind of like, cool, I went through that really I went through that really shitty dark night of the soul or whatever, and now I'm ready to pop out. Issue is the moon's in Sagittarius, and then it will make a square to Mars. So with the moon and Sag making a square to Mars is like, okay, we want to go to, like, Sagittarius is very like, what's our point B? And then what's our point C? And what's our point D? And Mars in Pisces is like, hey, like the journey is the destination. We have to like navigate this one step at a time, and don't be afraid to go here, go there, and go a little bit off course and see what's around. And I look at the moon squaring Mars as like, while we might have this emotional connection to wanting to go faster, wanting to go farther, the moon squaring Mars is like, hey, you just have to do what's important right now. Like keep all those hopes and ambitions like in your heart, like feel those, but there's specific things that you have to do right here, right now. Then we get to Saturday. The moon, while it's in Sag, is going to make a trine to the sun, and it will make a square to Saturn. And I don't typically talk about the luminaries making aspects to one another because typically there's always more things going on than that. But because there's not a lot going on here, we are in between eclipses. The sun is exalted in Aries. It's getting damn close to the north node, and the moon's in Sag trining it. Man, like muster up that confidence and that courageousness and that like excitement for life. Like, I really, really like that for Saturday. But as the moon makes this square to Saturn, I think it's important to, again, it reminds me of jet fuel. It's very rich and it burns really, really quickly. And so I think that can happen on Saturday. And I think as the moon makes that square to Saturn, it's like, all right, you burnt up all your like really expensive, nice fuel. You're going to feel kind of depleted. You're going to feel kind of low energy. And so I think what's important about the moon being in Sag squaring Saturn is like, okay, I have this excitement and this energy, but like I need to be in control of my emotions. I need to be disciplined with, how far they all go. Like, cool, I can be excited about the future, but am I going to be that person on the inside that I want to be? It's like, if you want to name anything that you want in your life, right? It's easy to say that stuff and get excited, but like, who do you have to become to be that person that has those things, that is living that life, that has those experiences. And that's what Saturn and Pisces is really about. Like, who do you have to become on the inside? And can you be aware of that? Can you be disciplined enough to achieve that? And I think you can. It's just a matter of being aware of it and practicing daily. And that's why we're doing these videos. And so as the moon's in Sag squaring Saturn, it's like, okay, cool. We're really excited, but like, let's bring that internal. Let's recognize what's going on inside. And is this like, am I trying to run away? Am I trying to be too excited? Or like, can I really temper this energy and bring it internal? We then get to Sunday at the end of the week. This is when the moon will make a square to Venus. It will then trine Mercury, and then it will square Neptune. And then by the evening on Sunday, the moon ingresses into Capricorn. So as the moon's in Sag squaring Venus, it is kind of one of those things where Venus in Pisces reminds me of like, enjoying the moment there. And for example, like let's say you're with, I keep using these kind of partying analogies, maybe because it's all this fun energy. But Venus in Pisces is like enjoying where you're at the moment, not worried about what's coming next. And the moon in Sag is like, this place is boring. Let's go here. Let's go here. Let's go do this. And it's like, if you've been to like out with your friends or out to a festival or a concert, and it's like you got people going over here, people going over there. It's kind of hard to control, and it can kind of disrupt how things are feeling. And I look at the moon squaring Venus too. I was just thinking about this when I wrote this of like, it reminds me of like ordering a really good dessert at a restaurant and it looks good, but it doesn't taste that good. Like there's some like, oh, like this is nice, but it has this weird taste. Like for me, I'm not a big fan of coconut. And so like whenever I see something like, oh, that looks good and I'll eat it. And I'm like, it's fucking coconut in it. Like it's fine, it's good, but it's got fucking coconut. That's just me though. So after that moon squares Venus, and there's again, like our emotions and like our pleasures are kind of not aligning. We like the moon contacting Venus, like in any sort of fashion, but it's kind of, again, you still got a nice dessert. It's still, tasty. It's just, it's got that one ingredient that you didn't really care for or something like that. The moon that makes a trine to Mercury though, the moon's in Sag, Mercury's in Aries. This is kind of connecting dots. As Mercury's about to go retrograde, that happens next week. And it's like literally motionless at this point. That moon in Sag trining Mercury is like, okay, what do I need to do? Mercury is about to go backwards. We're about to rethink, review, and actually catch up on all of the problems that Mercury in shadow gave us. And I think the moon in Sag trining Mercury is really about like, all right, how am I going to get this done? What am I going to do? Planning Sunday night for next week. Then as the moon makes a square to Neptune, again, I've been using this analogy a lot, and maybe some people get too annoyed of it, but like it's just getting lost in the sauce. Like the moon in Sag squaring Neptune is like, you can have these grandiose dreams and plans, but I think what's important is to have like be open with your expectations. Have little expectations. Like, for example, in all of the personal development work stuff I did, like it's really easy to like be like, oh, if it doesn't look this exact way, then I'm not going to enjoy it. Versus like you could probably get exactly what you want. It just may not look the way that you think it will look. And that's where you have to be open-minded and be aware of how else can X, Y, and Z that I want actually look in my life. And I think that's what's good for the moon squaring Neptune is like, hey, we could dream big, but like, let's leave our expectations open. Let's be open to how that picture that we want to paint is going to look. If you're an artist, if you make music, if you're any sort of creative, you have an idea in your head, and how that feels or, sounds or looks in your head is different from how it usually comes out. And sometimes it's even better, or sometimes it's different and it just kind of takes its own, form. That's how I look at that moon squaring Neptune. So don't get too lost in like the exact everything, but just being more of like, all right, this is my plan. This is what I kind of want. Let's be open to how it's going to look. Then we get to next week. Guys, next week, the next 2-3 weeks that we get into April, it gets nothing but crazy from here. We have Mercury stationing retrograde. We have Venus conjoining Neptune. We have Venus ingressing into Aries. We have Venus sextiling Pluto, and the sun conjoining the North Node. Next week is popping it off. And let me just reemphasize with this week being in between eclipses, and we have Mars building up to Saturn, and we have Mercury building up to going retrograde. This week is funky. This week is going to feel a little bit weird, but I know you guys can handle it, and I know you guys can do it. So thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. I love and appreciate you guys, and I'll be seeing you next week.